feared and feared through Killarney. Now I'm back to hit you with a win. But if Mickey Flynn should ever find me, I'll throw me caution all behind me and square off on that son of a bitch again. He cracked open a river too, he beat me Sunday through and through, and such over my unconscious frame. I won me healthy sheriff fights, well lucky son still had me life since Mickey Flynn beat me dumb and lame.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Disciples of Ed. I'm your host, Rob, joined tonight by Joe Bork. How you doing, Bork?
Doing solid. Happy that we'll get to it, but a milestone was reached this week for one of our Flyers, so makes it happier in a season that was not the happiest season. And the weather's beautiful, so those two things combined can never make you a sad person.
A milestone reached, and he did it in fairly dramatic fashion the other night. Of course, that is Claude Giroux with the 2 goals late in the game to pull out a 4-3 win over the New Jersey Devils. And since we last recorded, well, unfortunately, our last recording, due to some technical issues, did not make it up. We'll get that up. But since the last time that we had an episode out, they've played just about 500 hockey. The last 3 games, 2 wins and 1 loss, 1 win over the Rangers, a win over the Devils, sandwiched around a loss to the Rangers. So they're playing okay hockey, certainly a little bit better than they were about a month ago, but still significantly out of the playoff picture.
And then that Isles game was also just a microcosm of when your season's going shitty, you get the worst bounces in the history of man. And then when your season's going good, you're likely to be the team that scores that goal.
Oh, absolutely.
That 1-0 game, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a microcosm of the season for the Flyers, which who would have thought that it would end up like this after, how many games they were winning early on in the season. Yes, they weren't impressive. They were getting outshot in a lot of those games. They were lucky that they had such a high shooting percentage and were able to kind of benefit from some weak goaltending from the opposition early on in the season. But still, who would have thought that it would have gone from that great start that they had to this, where they have virtually no chance of making the playoffs? It's been probably one of the most, if not the most disappointing season of Flyers hockey, at least in my lifetime. I don't know if you feel the same way.
It's been one of them. It's hard. I think there's been rival seasons to this that have been equally disappointing, like when everybody thought, obviously, initially Hackstall would be more the guy that would be the college coach that would bring you to the playoffs and then somewhere not always get to the playoffs and then be literally the Eagles of the first 10 years of the 2000s and just be like, yeah, except for that Super Bowl run. Like, it's like, yeah, we just didn't really go anywhere with the Phillies in 07. So that almost frustrates me more. Once I know I'm out, I just start changing my mindset to who's the should they stay or should they go guys, and let me watch the young guys for the future and be happy about that, where I've kind of shifted my mindset to that about 2 weeks ago, even though we were mathematically in at that point. It did not seem likely. So I just, to actually deal with stress of the sports, learned to do that with myself, to shift my mindset early enough. So now it's to kind of next year and making these guys see who should stay and go. So that's kind of where I'm at this point. Otherwise, I get too boggled into everything, and that's when I go on those rants that are just not good for your health. So that's the way I look at things nowadays, Rob.
Yeah, I kind of agree. And you know what? I kind of likened this season to the lockout shortened 2013 season, because remember, they're coming off that really solid 2011-2012 campaign where they beat the Penguins in the first round of the playoffs before bowing out to the Devils. They finished with 100 plus points that year. Had a lot of good things going on to look forward to in the future. Some young guys, Matt Reed really stepped up in that 2011-2012 season. Some other young guys, Couturier really showed out. Giroux had a great season. And things were looking up so much after that 2011-2012 season. And then they had the lockout and the 2013 shortened year. They weren't the same hockey team. And I kind of view it the same way this time around, as the 1920 Flyers had They really exceeded expectations, and a lot of guys performed better than I think they were expected to. And there were such high expectations coming into this season, and it was the same thing. They kind of just fell flat on their face. And so for me, it's kind of an equal amount of disappointment between this year's team and that 2013 lockout season.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. That's a decent comparison. I think it's just this is another season that's shorter, obviously, than expected, and I think there's more in there, like coaching within. I think you're going to see the assistants go before you see AV go because Terrian does the special teams. Our special teams has been absolutely abysmal on both ends for mostly the entire season. We had a good, decent, small stretch run with our PK, but then that ended. And then apparently Yo does all the defense with the forwards and also helps just the defense as a whole in general. Well, our defense in terms of just forwards, not even talking about the defensemen, which is a whole different story for how some guys have declined. So I feel like Fletcher said he's not going to get rid of the coaching staff. I think that more meant we're not getting rid of AV. I would be shocked if every assistant coach is back next season because it would just kind of show me you don't seem to care about fixing the issues you have as much as it seemed like you put on as a front. Where that's why I don't see that happening.
Well, my fear is that they're just going to chalk this whole thing up to it's the COVID year. We're going to use that as a built-in excuse. Well, guess what? It's the COVID year for every other NHL team too. And I mean, all these teams that are doing better than the Flyers, Pittsburgh, Washington, the Islanders, the Rangers, you name it, all the teams that are above the Flyers in the standings, they had to deal with the same exact shit of having the shortened COVID season and having limited practices, and some of these teams having time off due to COVID like the Flyers did. That's not an excuse because every other team in the NHL had to deal with it. But I feel like the front office is going to chalk this whole thing up to it was an off year. Let's run it back next season with a full season and see how they do. And I don't think it's going to work out, but I have a bad feeling that that's the direction that the front office is going to go in.
Well, I mean, I think you got to make moves. I don't necessarily think after the weird seasons AV's had since coming here with all this COVID everything, I don't think it's because of that you had a decline, but he did good and then he went low. This year when he was very good, it was a high and now you have a low. I don't think you're going to get rid of this. Just seems like a situation. Sometimes you see the head coach gets axed right away, but I think more than not, if you look at the examples, I don't know them from me, you would see guys in mostly every sport. You see assistants go, and then if that doesn't work, that's when you see the head coach go. I think that's more likely what you would see from the Flyers, other than Lappy. I would keep Lappy because he's so zoned in with the development system of the team and everything about the organization. But the other guys, I would say at this point, they kind of met their shelf life already and just guys declined under them. Our special teams declined with Terry and our defense declined with Yale this year from last year. So I would say it's time to move on from them. I think AV shouldn't be moved on from yet just because this is a weird coaching scenario where we see other teams being patient with other guys too, where some teams did just axe guys, and I didn't agree with all that because these last 2 years have kind of been hell for everybody involved, but it's not an excuse to use for sucking when you should be good. The guys have even said that themselves. It's just, I want to get rid of your head coach for that reason, though. I would start with the assistants because I think it's more on them too, because those are what those guys primarily focus on, where AV obviously focuses on managing and making sure everybody's confident and kind of doing all those inner things that like a baseball manager would do too, like talking to everybody, where he is a guy that tries to assign and down and kind of not do everything himself, where it seems like the other guys are just not holding up their end of the block as much this year.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying that AV should be on the hot seat. I don't think he's the problem. I think the problem is exactly what you said it is. It's the assistant guys. Terrian hasn't held up his end of the bargain. Mike Yeo hasn't held up his end of the bargain. I'm just saying that the Flyers, I think, as a team, are going to chalk it up to it was the COVID year. We can let all of these coaches stick around. And I don't think that's the right way to go. I think AV should stick around just because his track record, he's got such a great track record in the NHL, and he's had very few seasons like this one. And when he has had them, he's always bounced back. So I trust AV to get it right. It's the assistant coaches who I don't. I feel like Michelle Therrien is a little bit too, I guess I would say like hardcore to kind of connect with some of these younger players. He's always been an in-your-face type, and me from especially from the last episode that we did of Chasing the Pennant, where I mentioned I like that hardcore type when we're talking about what Joe Girardi used to be up with the New York Yankees. I'm a fan of that type, but I feel like these younger players don't respond to it very well. And perhaps because of that, he's not the best fit here as an assistant in Philadelphia. And Mike Yo's, I feel like he's kind of the same way. So I would like to see them make a move in the assistant coaching department. I just feel like because of the whole COVID thing that they're just going to chalk it up to that and say, let's run it back with the same exact coaching staff next year. That's what I was getting at. I agree that AV should be back because of his track record of success.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would agree with you. If they don't get rid of people, I would think that's a mistake as well. And I think it's also when it's an assistant coach that's more in your face and you're a young guy, some guys probably have the person in their mind, well, this is the assistant getting right in my face, where at least if it's your head coach, like how Tortorella is a head coach, that's your head coach doing it, where you have the head boss doing it. You're probably going to be more inclined to listen to the guy that's the man that's making the last decision, or if you're in the lineup or not. So I think that plays into it a bit too when they know it's not working. Their system that they have in place isn't working because of what they put out on the ice, plus the guy's a little bit more in your face. So yeah, I can see that being a way of why it's not working as successfully as well.
Yeah, so anyway, we got we'll talk a little bit the last three games here. The Flyers with two wins over one win over the Rangers, one win over the Devils, a loss to the Rangers. And once again, both wins by one goal. They actually haven't had a win by more than one goal since, get this, February 28th up in Buffalo. The second half of that back-to-back where they won both games by a final of 3-0. That was the last time that they won a game by more than one goal.
Hopefully we have one this week against
damn near 2 months ago. And but they did pull out the 2 1-goal wins, and they've really been, Carter Hart, if I'm correct, he actually hasn't played in almost 2 weeks. His last performance was that 2-1 win out in Pittsburgh. And since then, we've got a couple starts from Alex Lyon, and we've gotten a few starts from Brian Elliott, who has played a little bit better lately. But I think that most of us, we would like to see Hart back between the pipes just to kind of see if he can build off that performance in Pittsburgh and kind of get something positive going towards the end of the season. But talking about these last 3 games, what's your takeaway from the last 3? And has there been anything that has impressed you a little bit that gives you some hope going into next season?
Yeah, well, I think in the first Rangers game, they looked better. The reason they outshot them by 1 is because of the third period shot total, but was by 1 different margin. But we looked better. We didn't play great in front of our goalie, but we had moments that we actually played solid in front of the goalie, where there's been games this year, the whole game, the Flyers team just looks like a complete mess, bad news Bears style in front of their goaltender. Which we'll get to in a second. But the first game against the Rangers, they looked pretty good. JVR got one off the face, which was scary for a moment, and then he's able to come back and score a big goal again. And then Voracek finally shot the puck rather than deciding to pass it when he should just shoot the puck. And that ended up being the deciding goal there. So I was happy to see that from Jake shooting the puck and seeing a great output from JVR, who hasn't been producing. You see people on fan groups complaining about that lately, getting back and getting the stuff going. And then, of course, he produced well in the game to bring them back. In the Devils game, he had the assist on the Giroux goal, both of Giroux's goals, along with Voracek. So those guys look good lately, which is good to see for next year since we have them under contract. But the in-between game against the Rangers was terrible, and I don't think it was really, some people, just because if you don't watch a whole game and then automatically just blame a goaltender, especially a guy that's not fully up in the NHL usually. But that game, Chris Kreider was right open in front of the damn net on the power play. And then Pavel Buchnevich, it looked like I was playing street hockey where people just can't defend, literally just lollygagged himself in front of the net, basically, and shot a wrist shot in. So that game, and then Heidel and Laffy were guarded poorly too, who scored the other 2 goals. That game was one. Lyon probably could have played a bit better, but I don't think he was the reason they lost by any stretch. That game, you just did not protect your goaltender at all. And when you usually see a third stringer come in, that's when teams tend to step up their ante even more, play more physical, try to protect him even more. The Flyers did the exact opposite of that, so that was bad to see. But then, of course, they played an absolute awful game for most of the game and then righted the ship with, like I said, JVR, Voracek, and Giroux coming up big. Giroux with the goal, but JVR and Voracek getting the assists on his goal to bring it within one and then tying goals. So it was like an emotional, like it was good, terrible, and then bad for most of the game, and then all of a sudden good. So it was a very weird last 3 games for the Flyers, but at least they were able to pull out 2 out of 3 wins in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, certainly a roller coaster, and it's good to see that at least, they're past the big steep dive of the roller coaster. Now they're kind of going through some corkscrews right now, if you will. But yeah, it's good to see them winning. On the other hand, it's kind of not great to see them maybe making their draft pick not so great. But I think that for this particular team with the young talent that they have, there's more value in getting some momentum going towards next season than there is in getting a higher draft pick and what projects to not really be one of the greater draft classes in recent memory. So it's good to see them kind of get it together a little bit, as you said.
Well, this draft class isn't bad. It's just you have to scout. It's more. I think those rumors, because this draft class was hyped, and then all of a sudden, because of COVID shutting down leagues, hasn't been as hyped. I think that's just some reporters getting lazy, in my opinion, because this draft class was once hyped. But I think I never usually agree with trying to lose, because that just brings a bad vibe to the team. Where I think you're going to always try to win, and if you scout correctly, you're going to be able to grab guys like Kakalainen does it all the time. The guy he grabbed, I can't pronounce Shenknikov or whatever you say, however you say his name in the round, is in the Gagarin Cup helping his team get all the way to the championship in Russia. So and they grabbed Forster, who's killing the AHL this year, who was picked in the 20s. So I think if you scout well enough, you're going to be fine if your pick's at 17 or 23, because we've already saw it. Millman, who was supposed to play in the OHL, which got canceled, looked good. All those guys looked good for a period of time. Millman and Forster really all season, and then Wisdom to start went cold for a bit. So I think if you draft well and you scout well, which we did solidly through Hextall and later rounds, those guys take 4 to 5 years to make it, but they are doing good overseas, some in college. I think that's good to see. Like you have O'Brien, Brink, Noah Cates, Jackson's brother, Lexell overseas, McLennan's doing fantastic in the WHL. So I think you have some good signs. They seem to be drafting, scouting well. It's just you're not getting those obviously McDavids of the world, but that's because you're not at that part of the draft. So unless if you trade up or get something, you're not going to get those guys. Or if you fall on a guy that turns into like the next Dasuk in the 7th round, that's just rare. So I've been pretty happy though with guys that I've seen from recent years. A lot of them have just been injuries, or their overseas team got delayed due to COVID. But now a lot of these guys are producing. So I don't really trip on the whole, is our pick 5 more or 5 less, because I've actually liked how Fair and Fletcher have teamed up in their first 2 drafts since they came in and kind of kept the Hextall system going and did not mess with that, since he actually had pretty good scouts in place and also the analytics and all that combined with, they brought in more surface numbers with analytics, which I like, the eyesight stuff combined. So I think they're doing a pretty good job, but that's just
it. Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat this year, that I think there's more value in scouting than actual draft position. Unfortunately, we've seen it with a few of our teams here in Philadelphia that the scouting isn't exactly great, and we've seen the Phillies have so many high draft picks that they've completely wasted.
We got to remember, though, it might not always be the scouting. It could be the Howie effect.
It could be that.
Lentak was just like, yeah, I see what you're saying, but I don't care.
I'm just saying, if you look at some of our recent high draft picks, it just in Philadelphia in general, Nolan Patrick hasn't turned out to be anything great. Mickey Moniak just got sent back down. Carson Wentz is playing in Indianapolis right now. I mean, high draft picks they haven't exactly been kind. Ben Simmons is another one. I mean, he's been good, but he hasn't been number one overall pick good. And then Markel Fultz you have as well. So high draft picks have not exactly been a blessing here in Philadelphia. Meanwhile, our teams have sometimes been able to hit on some of the later picks in the first round, and you hope that that's kind of going to be the same case for the Flyers. And I trust the Flyers. I think the Flyers have done a better job scouting and acquiring young talent than the other teams in the city have. And it was a rough season for some of the guys this year. So certainly a rough season for guys like Sanheim and Provorov and Lindblom and Konechny. But they're young players and they're still very good. And I think they're going to bounce back. And I'm also excited to see what the young prospects the Flyers have in their system can do moving forward. Guys like Cam York, who's now up with the Phantoms and playing well. It's exciting to see what the young guys can do,
and I'm hopeful that they can. Last game, York.
Yeah, that was really good to see, and I'm using that as an example that having a mid first round draft pick or even a late first round draft pick isn't the worst thing in the world if you can scout well.
It was actually a funny story about that. I was at the Phillies game because that was in 2019 when we picked Cam. And I remember I was talking to, I can't remember who it was, but I was there with Andrew, and I was saying, yeah, we're probably going to pick that defenseman, York, and people are going to freak out because they want, what's his name? Caulfield. There we go.
I was one of them.
Yeah. And then I went, okay, they did what I expected them to do. And then I literally said, okay, well, there's Bobby Brink that everyone ranked as the second best scorer, so it would make logistical sense for them to pick them. That was the only draft of my entire life I predicted the first two picks.
You should have bet on it.
Yeah, I probably should have, because like I just was talking to him going down to the game and he's like, yo, they did exactly what you said. And I was like, yeah, well, that's once in a lifetime. But I think this team, when it comes to scouting, though, what I like about them is they combine the overseas scouting well by getting guys through the draft from overseas, but also via like the Sandines, and obviously Raffle became a very good mainstay here before we, of course, moved on from him recently that we got undrafted overseas. Same with Zamula, who's making his debut tonight. They do a good combination of getting guys from college, getting guys from overseas, and getting guys, like the Fairbees and Frost, if it wasn't for his injuries, that would be up quickly, combined with the guys that are going to be their bodies are going to be ready as soon as they come out because they're 23, 24 and played all their years in college, or 4 years overseas. So I think they're doing a good combination scouting. That's why I like what the Flyers are doing. I wouldn't like if they were just focusing on one thing. I like teams that multi-focused and really expand out, especially in hockey, because it's becoming more popular all over the world, not less. So these leagues are going to continue to get better and better over time that are not just the Swedish and Russian league. So it's going to be very good to see that going over time to see them scout just that well. So I really like what I've seen from these teams, like getting Ronnie Attard, who's there, John St. Ivani, John, whatever you want to call them. They're in college developing. They'll be pretty much built at an NHL level because they're come out after college. So I think they do a good combination. Desjardins is doing good that they picked in the 5th round of 2020 for Halifax in the Q. He has 49 points in freaking 37 games. So they're doing a good combination, and that's just what I like to see. I agree with you full-heartedly. We're giving them a lot more praise, I guess, than we would expect in this podcast since our season has sucked. But I guess it's because we're moving on to let's focus on the future. And I do like what I've seen from covering the Phantoms for Nitty Gritty this year and from following guys overseas and watching some of the games they put up on YouTube. A lot of these guys look pretty damn good in the juniors, watching them, or if they put those overseas games on hockey TV, they look pretty damn good. So I'm pretty excited to watch some of these guys as they keep developing. That's where my focus is now. Focus on who should stay, who should go as my final thought. How these guys develop overseas, they're very fun to watch. I love watching the prospect reports and everything. And then just seeing how we're able to finish out this season. You never want to try to lose. So that's just always my mindset for it. I trust this team to pick somebody wherever they're at in the first round. So I think they'll be fine when it comes to that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I hope that continues to be the case this year because it's an important year for them draft-wise if they want to continue to build towards having sustained success in the future. You don't want to continue this trend of making the playoffs one year, missing the playoffs the next, as they've been doing since 2012. You want to have that team that can consistently be in the playoffs every year, and they need to build this young talent in order to attain that consistency. Any final thoughts from you before we wrap this one up?
My only one would be obviously Big Z. Edgar Zamul is making his debut tonight, so it'll be very fun and exciting to watch him. This podcast will be coming out tomorrow after he makes his debut, so hopefully we'll be happy. And with his debut, win or lose for the team, just how he plays overall. And I've liked how Cates looked in his first 2 games out of Minnesota Duluth. That's a very good program. So I really do, like I said, I complimented how the Flyers scout people seem to do a good job picking up a brother of someone they drafted in Noah. Getting him as an undrafted guy. So maybe you have a brother duo here in the future. We'll see. We'll probably at least have a nice brother duo for the Phantom. So that's pretty exciting to see as something as well as a story to follow. Plus, Edgar Zamula, I think, is going to be another great undrafted pickup. Just like I still think even Meyer struggling, AV's kind of said this himself, will still be good. It's just this is his off year. A lot of youngsters have that, especially young defensemen. This is the year for him. Let's see what he can do next year.
Yeah, and you mentioned that was, I think, one of the bigger issues is just having so many young defensemen. You know that these guys were bound to have a down year, Sanheim and Myers in particular. So I'm looking forward to seeing those guys bounce back in the next couple of years as well. My final thought is, if you're looking for something to eat while you're watching the Flyers or for any reason whatsoever, the place to go is Just Food. You can reach them by phone at 215-794-3663. It's 215-794-FOOD. Just Food is located in Buckingham, Pennsylvania, in Buckingham Green. They've got an excellent selection. Basically anything you want, they've got it. Awesome food. Never once had any complaint about them. Really, really a great place to go. And their owner, Agent Rob, a great friend of the Always Next to Your Podcast Network. Once again, Just Food, located in Buckingham Green, Buckingham, PA. 215-794-3663. It's 215-794-FOOD. We thank you for listening to this episode of the Disciples of Ed, and we'll be back with another one next week.
Man, I used to be revered and feared through Killarney. Now I'm back to hitching with the wind. But if Mickey Flynn should ever find me, I'll throw me caution all behind me and square off on that son of a bitch again. He cracked open a river too, he beat me Sunday through and through, and such over my unconscious frame. I won me healthy sheriff fights, well lucky souls still have me life since Mickey Flynn beat me dumb and lame.